What do we want? Real democracy! When do we want it? Now! What do we want? Real democracy! When do we want it? Now!
Welcome to Real Democracy Now. I'm Nivek Thompson, and Real Democracy Now is a podcast for people who think we can and should improve how democracy works. This podcast looks at democracy from different angles to help you think about how democracy might be improved. Welcome to Season 1 of Real Democracy Now, a podcast. Season 1 is looking at deliberative mini-publics, what they are, how they work, and what their limitations are. The last few episodes have looked at different approaches to the design and delivery of deliberative mini-publics. In episode 5, I spoke to Professor Jeanette Harps-Karp about various processes she had designed and run in Western Australia. And in episode 6, I spoke to Peter McLeod from Mass LBP about how they design and run processes in Canada. Today I'm talking to Iain Walker, Executive Director of the newDemocracy Foundation. The newDemocracy Foundation is an independent, non-partisan research organisation here in Australia that aims to identify improvements to our democratic process with a focus on promoting deliberative mini-publics as a key democratic reform. Iain has been with newDemocracy since 2011 and has designed and managed over 20 deliberative mini-publics for local and state governments. It would be fair to say that the newDemocracy Foundation has played a key role in the growing popularity of these type of processes in Australia. I asked Iain to explain how newDemocracy approaches the design of deliberative mini-publics.
Step one is actually working out what's hard. Is there actually a decision to be made? So particularly at an elected tier or with their advisors, but even with a government agency, we'll say, firstly, what's the decision you can't take without us? And generally it will be something that fails a headline test. You know, one of our little thresholds is are we likely to get a different decision between people's 30-second opinion and their time after being immersed in a topic or 40 or 50 hours? And there's some decisions which don't fit that criteria. Marriage equality is one. It's a topic where whatever people's views are today will probably still be their view in 10, 20, 30 hours of hearing many perspectives on the issue. You've obviously got to make a fit where it's not a silver bullet, so go to the area of best fit. Once we're in that, we start to look at who is the community, because this notion of random selection, we're not entirely random like lotto balls. We do stratified random selection. And so by default, we're trying to get a mix of people matched to the census by age, by gender, by geography and where they live, and by income as much as we can. Sometimes in specific instances, and the City of Sydney project was an interesting one for this, you look at who is the community and you realise for the city, there are people who live in the city, there's people who work in the city, and there's people who come to the city for shopping and entertainment. So they're the sort of gateway decisions that we look at up front. And then as we start to look at the design, fortunately we have a little bit of heritage now with the projects that we've run. Time is the critical thing to estimate, and if you're going to miss on the high side. You don't want to miss too high because every one of those meetings costs money, and quite a lot of money at that. But the number one way to get a deliberative process design wrong is to not allow people sufficient time. If citizens feel the time is wildly insufficient, they'll probably think that they're being corralled into a decision, and I would probably be on their side and say, you're probably right. If you get the time right, if you get the baseline information piece right and give them enough time to range through an array of sources, then you should end up with an insightful set of recommendations. And that's what essentially keeps me awake at night when we start to look at these process designs. Just look at, have we got a question whether the government is open to multiple potential answers? Is it something where citizens, there's enough substance to get into it and it isn't something that's opinion and motivation based? And if we can do that and actually get that commitment of authority up front, then for a vast swathe of everyday people, we're making it worth their while to bring their insight to the table. I mean, certainly one of the starting points is we do invite governments to start out with this view of, you right now hear from all the insisted voices banging on your door. We'd like you to counterbalance that with some invited voices through a jury. And the word there is counterbalance. It's not exclude the active advocate voices, but it's to recognise that, well, you're not the community. You're another voice with an interest. Now, we heard a great comment, I think it was actually through a UTS-driven piece of research, where stakeholders had offered the comment, this is all very well and good, but if that invited group haven't heard from person A, then how can they possibly be well informed? And it's actually a very fair point. And so one of the key deliverables, we always look at stakeholder programs, as well as just explaining to them how we work, is to say, You have specific insight into this topic area or this local area, for example. Why don't you nominate the long list of speakers and so thereby create a sort of starting point witness list that random group of people may wish to consider? But going beyond that, letting them nominate the first 5, 6, 7 speakers to appear before the jury. Now, invariably, stakeholder groups, if you've really thrown the net widely, you will have a group of people with widely ranging and conflicting opinions. And this is a good thing. The more we can take people very broadly, so they can get this diversity of opinions up front, it then gives them something against which to test, something to think, well, what voices do I need to verify or disprove some of the things that I've heard? So that's become quite fundamental to us, including stakers both in a, not quite oversight, but certainly an inside the tent journey, so they can see the transparency of the methodology. The great thing about this is doesn't just look hard to trick up, it is very, very hard to cheat the methodology. And then once they've appreciated that they're all going to get a chance at a fair hearing, structuring in that chance to get their voice in the room in a way that, it's a benefit. It's delivering information to the jurors that we want, giving them a starting point, but not giving them any more control than that. And I think when you include stakeholders, the best place to do it is right up front. And after that, ensure you have as much time as possible where the jury takes control. I mean, the first golden rule is we're not peacekeepers. So an issue that is red hot where the government has to make a decision is not one where you would seek to get involved. The wonderful shorthand I got from Nick Greiner and Jeff Gallup, I think in my first week doing this job, is there's a perfect fit in crime, tax, planning. Look at those areas which no one will move on because they fail the headline test. Crime is a wonderful one, where you look at there is an electoral need to be tough on crime, but if you look at the facts and statistics behind it, many elected representatives we speak to say if you showed all the facts to any random group of 100 people, they would come up with something quite different to what we do today. That's the kind of response that we're looking for in a project. Equally, the Henry Tax Review, that'd be something that we'd love to show to a group of citizens and see, once they've had the chance to go through it, whether they can make a tax system which Australians have greater faith and confidence in as fair and meeting the needs of raising the money that the government is seeking. Purely moral issues where people won't change their mind and issues with very shallow basis of information are less well suited. So that tends to be the line that I draw. You also want to make sure that you have enough time for the decision. That's one of the very early conversations is, great, we found a wonderful issue. When does the government need to move? If we really don't have at least 6 or 7 months, it is better not to start down the path. So hopefully that gives a little bit of a snapshot of the array of checkpoints of where there's a good fit, but that golden rule of, is there going to be a difference between your 30-second decision and your 40-hour immersion in a topic? That's a very simple little checklist that's always in the front of my mind. Juries are fantastic at trade-offs. So where there's a trade-off involved, that's an absolutely good fit. Values, values are not confined to single issues. Values underpin all decisions and all, the way people act and interact with one another. But if I look at what it takes to recruit people into a room, they want to see some decision coming out of it. So something that is generally directional, something that is, dare I say, a little bit motherhood statement in nature. What's the future we want for our area? Where people can't see a concrete decision coming out the other side, we know we struggle to recruit everyday people. It becomes a little more special interest driven. So that fine point of where there's a fit is where there's a clear problem being addressed and the government concerned is being open that this is a problem worth solving. Where it's an aspirational, let's look forward, but without any kind of sense of how it ties into their operations or decision making, then I'm extremely wary.
Next, Iain provided a real-world example of how he applied these design principles in practice.
I think the City of Melbourne provides a nice example of that. It's something where I think uniquely we were originally approached by the CFO, who came to us with the classic problem of those running for office do tend to promise things. I will offer you a cycleway. I will upgrade this shopping precinct. They will make a commitment to an urban forest. And not unique to the City of Melbourne, not unique to Australia. In fact, common to every election that's ever been run is no one ever saying how that they will pay for it. And the city, when they looked forward at their financial projections, there was a substantial gap between these commitments that had been made and the revenue that was being raised from the city. And as a shorthand, the city runs on around about $400 million per year, of which $255 million was rates. So income that you can affect by putting up or down. And the city was approximately, on their estimates, about $1.2 billion overspent across 10 years. So if you divide back and avoid discounted cash flow in the mornings, you're looking at about $120 million a year extra required on a $250 million rates base. That's a significant increase. And so when we discuss this, obviously no one in elected office can afford to simply walk away from their promises. Equally, they cannot simply afford to do dramatic changes in rates. So this gave us a chance to take 43 people at random, stratified when we looked at who is the community as half people who paid rates as a business and half residents, and see if they could find some common ground on a question that effectively amounted to how the city could live within its means. And that was, many councillors, I think, had very strong personal project beliefs on certain items, and the nature of these juries finding common ground is that people will there's a strong chance that you're going to make everyone unhappy to some degree. But the acid test is when that report came through, when that jury actually spoke to the council. A range of councillors from a range of perspectives ultimately voted to proceed with the vast majority of their recommendations. And I think if you do a shorthand, the revenue measures and the asset measures and the change to services closed between $800 and $900 million of that gap. That's a substantive success. When you look at why do engagement, don't just do it to feel good and feel cuddly at night. It's a chance to say, is there some way we can involve the community that helps us in a way that as elected representatives alone, we can't do it? And I'm always wary of quoting people off the top of my head, so it could be worth speaking to Councillor Stephen Mayne directly. And Councillor Mayne, he offered a comment along the lines of, it's not that we couldn't have made the decision to, adjust the rates or change some of the service levels ourselves. It's that we, in the veil of politics, we were struggling to even have the conversation, because the first person to bring up that things have to change creates, a political bullseye on them. And this is a great example of this complementary role of a group of people who weren't in the electoral fray, who didn't care essentially what was said about them, within reason. They just wanted to solve a problem because they lived there, and they didn't have to keep one eye on the media. They didn't have to worry about their election prospects. They were just given a problem to solve and a good level of authority that they thought was worth their time, and they went a long way towards that. And I think that's a really good example of a project that has an impact, and why we've learned that pre-negotiating authority is immensely important. And it's also a better chance to do it up front when people are feeling the pain of their problem, saying, well, if you do this, then it has to be public, you have to respond in full. We always respect that the elected office is the final decision maker, but increasingly we're showing that there is a complementary role, and if you show people the respect of taking their answer seriously, then they deliver you an answer that is very, very implementable.
The example Iain described is interesting not only for how it was designed and delivered, but also because it was one of those hybrid approaches where a deliberative mini-public was used to engage citizens in what was essentially a participatory budgeting decision. In the next episode, I'll be talking to Professor Graham Smith from Westminster University in London about 2 citizens' assemblies he has recently been involved in designing and delivering. Both of these citizens' assemblies were looking at devolution at the local government level. These deliberative mini-publics are quite different to the ones described in today's and earlier episodes, in part because they included an experimental element. These 2 citizens' assemblies used 2 different designs, which were then compared through formal research to assess, amongst other things, the impact of including elected representatives as part of the process. I hope you'll join me to hear more about how deliberative mini-publics are designed and delivered around the world. Thanks for listening to Real Democracy Now! You can find more about today's topic in the show notes at www.realdemocracynow.com.au. If you enjoyed this program, please subscribe to this podcast, write a review, share the podcast with your friends, and join the conversation on the webpage or on Facebook or Twitter. I'd love to know what you think is the essence of a real democracy.